The corridors of the Ellington estate stretched endlessly before Richard as he walked briskly away from the sunroom. His pulse pounded in his ears. He told himself he wasn't running, from Isabella, from his father's strange words, from the unease clawing at his chest. He was simply tired, overworked, vulnerable to theatrics. Yet when he reached his study and shut the heavy oak door behind him, the silence only amplified the turmoil inside. He poured himself a glass of scotch, the amber liquid catching the lamplight, and stared into it as though it held the answers. Why had Isabella's words unsettled him so deeply? Why did his father, a man of logic and iron will, speak with such conviction about her gift? Richard took a long sip, hoping to drown the questions. But the images returned, his father's laughter, Isabella's calm gaze, the haunting music. He couldn't shake the feeling that something extraordinary was unfolding right under his roof. Hours passed. Sleep never came. At dawn, Richard found himself back in the West Wing, drawn by an invisible tether. The sunroom glowed with the early morning light, and there she was again, Isabella, at the piano, her fingers coaxing a melody so soft it felt like a heartbeat. Beside her sat Henry, vibrant and alert, sipping tea with a steadiness Richard hadn't seen in years. They looked up as he entered. Isabella's smile was gentle, expectant, as though she knew he would return. Richard cleared his throat. "I couldn't sleep." Henry chuckled knowingly. "That's what happens when you begin to hear what your heart has been ignoring." Richard ignored the jab and turned to Isabella. "Play something else. Something for me." Isabella inclined her head gracefully and began. The melody shifted, stronger, heavier, layered with both sorrow and resilience. As the notes filled the room, Richard felt his chest tighten. Images surged through his mind. His mother's gentle touch, long buried, his children's laughter, fading like echoes, the nights he had sat alone in his penthouse, surrounded by wealth yet aching with emptiness. He gripped the back of a chair, fighting against the wave of emotion. But the music was relentless, unraveling him piece by piece. His eyes stung, and before he could stop it, a tear slipped down his cheek. Henry's voice, steady and proud, broke the silence. "That's it, son. Let it out." Richard shook his head, ashamed. "This is foolish. I don't cry. I can't." Isabella's playing softened, her voice weaving into the melody. "You've been carrying too much for too long. It's not weakness to feel, Mr. Ellington. It's the beginning of healing." The words pierced him deeper than any accusation could. Richard sank into a chair, burying his face in his hands. For the first time in decades, he let himself feel the weight of everything he had lost. When the music ended, the room was silent except for Richard's uneven breaths. Slowly, he looked up. Isabella's eyes held no judgment, only understanding. His father's expression was one of quiet triumph. Richard exhaled shakily. "What are you, Isabella? Who are you, really?" She stood, moving toward him with a serenity that felt almost otherworldly. "I am nothing more than a passerby. A messenger, perhaps. I come when I am needed, and when my task is complete, I move on. I don't heal with my hands, but with music, I remind people of what they've forgotten, the parts of themselves buried under pain, fear, and ambition." Henry leaned forward. "And she's given me more than doctors ever could. Time, joy, a chance to see my son again, not the cold businessman the world knows, but the boy I once held in my arms." Richard's throat tightened. He looked at his father, then at Isabella. For years, he had believed emotions were a liability, that vulnerability equaled weakness. Yet in one night, this mysterious woman had shown him the truth. Without connection, without love, wealth was nothing more than numbers on a screen. Richard straightened, wiping his eyes. "If you leave, will this vanish? Will I go back to the man I was?" Isabella smiled sadly. "That choice is yours. I can open the door, but you must walk through it." The weight of her words sank deep. Richard realized the power had always been within him. Isabella was not magic. She was a mirror, reflecting the humanity he had tried to bury beneath contracts and empires. Henry reached across the table, placing his frail but steady hand over Richard's. "Don't waste this, son. Don't wait until it's too late to remember what truly matters." Richard nodded slowly, a resolve forming inside him. He would repair what was broken, with his family, with himself. He would not let his empire define him anymore. When he looked back at Isabella, he sensed it was farewell. She seemed to know it too. That night, she was gone. No trace of her remained, except for the lingering melodies that seemed etched into the walls of the mansion. But Richard was different. He called his wife the next morning, speaking to her with a gentleness she hadn't heard in years. He arranged to visit his children, not in the shadow of duty but with genuine longing. Even at his company, he began to shift, not abandoning ambition, but tempering it with compassion. Henry watched with pride, his final years filled with the joy of seeing his son transformed. And Richard, though he never saw Isabella again, carried her gift within him. Every time he sat at the piano in the sunroom, every time he closed his eyes and let the music guide him, he remembered. He had come home late one night and witnessed something unbelievable. And it had changed him forever. Richard remained rooted to the polished marble floor, his sharp gaze darting between Isabella and his father. The weight of Henry's cryptic words pressed heavily against his chest. "Saving the house," Richard repeated, his voice edged with disbelief. "Father, you've grown sentimental. This girl is a stranger. I need answers." Henry chuckled, the sound surprisingly robust for a man who'd spent months confined to a wheelchair. "You sound just like your board members, always demanding explanations." "Sit, Richard. For once, sit and listen." Richard wanted to argue, to demand Isabella leave immediately. But something about Henry's vigor, his glowing complexion, his animated spirit, compelled him to obey. Against his instincts, he lowered himself into a leather armchair by the piano. Isabella resumed her seat, folding her hands neatly on her lap. Her poise unsettled Richard. She was calm, confident, almost regal, as though she belonged in this grand room more than he did. Henry's eyes softened. "You see, son, Isabella came to us when I was at my lowest. I had all but surrendered to my illness. Doctors said my time was near. But this young woman walked into my life and gave me something no medicine ever could, hope." Richard frowned. "How? Who brought her here?" Isabella spoke for the first time since her introduction. "I came on my own, Mr. Ellington. I've been traveling for years, using my gift where it's needed. Your father was special. He welcomed me when others might not have." Richard arched a brow. "Gift? What gift?" Isabella's lips curved into a faint smile. "Music. Healing through sound. It may sound strange to a man of numbers and contracts, but I assure you, it is real." Richard's instinct was to scoff. He had built an empire on logic, strategy, and unyielding control. The idea that a stranger's piano playing had restored his father's strength was absurd. Yet, there Henry sat, healthier than Richard had seen in years. Henry leaned forward, his eyes locked on his son's. "Don't dismiss it, Richard. I've lived long enough to know miracles when they find me. This girl has a way of reaching inside, past the walls, past the fear. She gives back what you've lost." Richard shook his head. "Father, you sound bewitched." He turned to Isabella. "What are you really after? Money, fame, access to the Ellington fortune?" A shadow crossed Isabella's face, but she didn't flinch. "I want nothing from you. If I desired wealth, I would have accepted the offers of dozens of wealthy men who begged me to stay. I only go where I am needed, and when my work is done, I leave." Richard leaned back, arms crossed. "Convenient. And when will your work be done here?" Henry chuckled again, but this time it was tinged with sadness. "That depends, son. On you." Richard stiffened. "On me? What does that mean?" Isabella's eyes, deep and unreadable, met his. "Your father is not the only one in need of healing, Mr. Ellington. You carry burdens heavier than you admit. Success, power, wealth, you've built walls so high you no longer see what lies beyond them. But I do." Her words cut deeper than Richard expected. For a moment, he felt exposed, as though she had peeled back layers he had spent years cementing in place. He tried to mask his unease with a smirk. "You speak like a fortune teller," he said coldly. "I don't need healing. I need loyalty, clarity, control." Henry sighed, shaking his head. "Richard, when did you become so blind? Do you think your endless wealth makes you untouchable? You've sacrificed everything, family, peace, love, for power. But at what cost?" The silence that followed was suffocating. Richard's mind flashed with memories he had long buried. His wife's growing distance, his children's absence, the empty penthouse where he spent most nights. He had traded everything for his empire, convincing himself it was worth it. Isabella rose from the piano bench, her gown catching the light as she walked toward him. Richard instinctively stiffened, but she stopped just short of his chair, her gaze unwavering. "You came home tonight for a reason, Mr. Ellington," she whispered. "Some part of you knew. You felt it pulling you here." Her words unsettled him because they were true. He had no logical explanation for why he refused his assistant's offer to stay in the city. He had felt something, an urge, a calling. Henry's voice broke the moment. Richard, listen to her. You don't have to believe, not yet. But if you shut your heart to this, you'll lose more than you realize. Richard exhaled sharply, trying to steady himself. He was a man who thrived on facts, yet here he was, caught in a storm of emotion, watching his frail father appear rejuvenated by the presence of a mysterious woman. He pushed himself to his feet. This is too much. I need time. Isabella nodded softly, as though she had expected his response. Take the time you need. But remember, the truth does not wait forever. Richard turned and strode out of the room, the echo of piano notes still lingering in his ears. As he walked down the empty corridor, his reflection flashed in the tall windows, powerful, controlled, untouchable. And yet, for the first time in years, Richard Ellington felt something he could not name, fear. The clock struck midnight when Richard Ellington's limousine rolled quietly through the long, lantern-lined driveway of his sprawling estate. The billionaire, known for his ruthless business acumen and larger-than-life public persona, was not accustomed to returning home this late. Board meetings, gala dinners, and negotiations with foreign investors had delayed him far beyond his usual hours. As the car stopped before the mansion's grand entrance, Richard loosened his tie and rubbed his temples. He was exhausted. His assistant had begged him to stay at the penthouse in the city, but Richard had refused. For reasons he couldn't quite explain, he had felt an unusual pull to return to his countryside home tonight. He dismissed the driver with a tired wave. The estate loomed silent in the pale moonlight, its tall windows glowing faintly with scattered lights left on inside. Richard stepped out, inhaling the crisp air, and made his way to the front doors. Something in the stillness felt different. Usually, the estate was wrapped in a blanket of quiet luxury, the kind of silence born from perfection. But tonight, Richard noticed faint noises drifting through the night. A murmur of laughter. The strum of music. Then, he realized, it was coming from inside. He frowned. Who could be here at this hour? His wife was away in Europe, attending a charity summit. His children were at boarding schools. The staff usually retired early after preparing the mansion for the next day. He pulled open the doors, his polished shoes echoing across the marble floor of the grand hall. The sound grew louder now, unmistakable. Piano notes carried across the hall, accompanied by the soft hum of a voice. Richard followed the melody, his footsteps careful, almost hesitant. The music was coming from the sunroom at the far end of the west wing, a place he rarely visited. The glass doors leading to it were ajar, golden light spilling into the hallway. Peering inside, Richard froze. There, seated at the grand piano, was a young woman. Her long, dark hair shimmered under the chandelier as her fingers danced across the keys with effortless grace. She wasn't part of his staff. He had never seen her before. She looked far too young, perhaps in her early 20s, and her gown shimmered like liquid silver. But it wasn't just her presence that left him stunned, it was the man standing beside her. His father, Richard's father, Henry Ellington, had been a titan of industry before age and illness forced him into seclusion. Richard had taken over the empire years ago, and Henry had since lived quietly in a private wing of the mansion, rarely emerging. The old man had grown frail, his health declining, his spirit dimmed. Doctors had warned he had little time left. Richard had accepted this with a cold, practical heart. Yet now, here Henry was, standing tall, stronger than Richard had seen him in years. His face glowed with color, his eyes alive with something Richard hadn't witnessed since childhood, joy. Henry was smiling, clapping softly in rhythm with the piano music. He leaned down to whisper to the young woman, and both burst into laughter. Richard's mind spun. Who was she? Why was his father with her at this hour? And why did it feel as though he had walked into a secret world, one that had existed in his home, hidden from him? Father. Richard finally spoke, his voice breaking the spell. The music stopped abruptly. The young woman's fingers froze on the keys. Henry turned, his expression caught between surprise and delight. Richard, Henry said warmly, as though nothing were amiss. You're home. Richard stepped inside, confusion tightening his chest. What's going on here? Who is she? The young woman stood gracefully, bowing her head with respect. Good evening, Mr. Ellington, she said softly. Her voice carried a melodic quality, almost hypnotic. My name is Isabella. Richard narrowed his eyes. And what exactly are you doing in my house, Isabella? Henry's smile deepened, but there was a mysterious gleam in his eyes. She's not just in this house, Richard. She's saving it. Richard blinked. Saving it? What on earth are you talking about? Henry placed a gentle hand on Isabella's shoulder, as though she were something precious, irreplaceable. She's given me back my life, he said quietly. And soon, she may give you back yours. The room felt colder suddenly, the chandelier lights casting long shadows across the floor. Richard stared at his father and the mysterious Isabella, a storm of questions burning inside him. What had he just walked into? And why did he feel as though everything he thought he knew about his family, his home, and perhaps even himself, was about to change forever?